Walk into an old farmhouse on a 95-degree afternoon. No central air, no window units humming, no electricity running to any cooling system whatsoever. It is 72 degrees inside, not because the walls are magic, not because the building is unusually shaded, because the people who built it understood something about heat, airflow, and thermal mass that 3 generations of American residential construction have systematically forgotten, or more precisely, been taught to forget. These buildings are not rare. They exist across the American Midwest, the rural South, the agricultural regions of France, the farmlands of northern Italy, and the working countryside of England. Structures built between 1820 and 1920 that maintain interior temperatures 20 to 25 degrees below peak outdoor air on the hottest days of summer without a single mechanical cooling system. Documented, measured, reproducible. A building scientist from the University of Vermont studied 34 pre-1900 New England farmhouses in 2018. He measured interior temperatures against outdoor conditions across an entire summer without any mechanical cooling assistance. 31 of the 34 maintained interiors at least 18 degrees cooler than peak outdoor temperature on days exceeding 90 degrees. The 3 that did not had been renovated, insulated, sealed, and modernized in ways that destroyed the thermal management geometry their builders had engineered into them a century earlier. The modernization made them worse, measurably, documentably worse. And the industry that sold those renovations never mentioned that possibility to a single homeowner it billed for the work. The residential construction industry generates $900 billion annually in the United States. It depends on one assumption surviving every conversation between a contractor and a homeowner that older buildings are thermally inferior to newer ones, and that the path to comfort is always more mechanical equipment, more insulation, more sealed envelope, and more monthly electricity consumption to run the systems that the ceiling makes necessary. That assumption is not supported by the performance data of the buildings it replaced. This is the story of farmhouse thermal architecture. The building science that kept American families comfortable through summers that had no mechanical cooling. The design principles that the residential construction industry spent a century replacing with equipment that costs more to buy, more to run, and more to maintain than the geometry it made obsolete. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of knowledge that textbooks quietly stopped teaching and corporations quietly stopped mentioning, hit the like button and subscribe to Lost Tech Vault right now. Every vault we open here costs someone powerful a great deal of money to keep shut. Make sure you never miss the next one we crack open. The thermal performance of a traditional American farmhouse was not accidental. It was not the passive result of thick walls and large trees. It was the product of deliberate architectural decisions made by builders who understood the relationship between sun angle, airflow, thermal mass, and human comfort. In ways that the modern residential construction industry, optimized around material cost, construction speed, and equipment sales, has no financial incentive to replicate. The first decision was orientation. Traditional farmhouses were oriented with their primary ridgeline running east to west and their longest wall facing south. This was not aesthetic preference. It was solar geometry. A south-facing long wall receives maximum winter solar gain through its windows, passively heating the interior during cold months. Deep roof overhangs, typically 24 to 36 inches on traditional farmhouse construction, compared to the 6 to 12 inches standard on modern tract housing, were calculated to block direct summer sun from entering those south-facing windows during summer months when the sun sits high in the sky, while allowing full winter sun penetration when the sun angle is low. Passive solar control, built into the roof geometry, costing nothing to operate across the entire life of the building. The second decision was ceiling height. Traditional farmhouse ceilings ran between 10 and 14 feet on the ground floor. Modern residential construction standardized at 8 feet in the post-war era, a decision driven entirely by material cost reduction and construction speed, not by thermal performance. Hot air rises. In a room with 14-foot ceilings, the occupied zone, the 6 feet of space where human beings actually live and breathe, remains separated from the accumulated heat layer at ceiling level by 8 feet of vertical buffer. in a room with 8-foot ceilings that buffer is 2 feet. The occupied zone sits directly beneath the accumulated heat layer. The air conditioning system that 8-foot ceiling construction makes necessary is not solving a climate problem. It is solving a ceiling height problem that the construction industry created to save $400 in lumber per house. The third decision was the dog trot, the central breezeway. The through-house ventilation corridor that appears in some form in virtually every regional farmhouse tradition across the American South and Midwest. A passage running from front to back of the building at ground level that creates a pressure-driven airflow channel through the thermal core of the structure. On a still day with no outside wind, the temperature differential between the shaded interior breezeway and the sun-heated exterior creates a convective flow that moves air continuously through the building. On a breezy day, the breezeway amplifies and channels that airflow through every room connected to it. The dog trot was not a design aesthetic. It was a passive cooling engine built into the floor plan. The fourth decision was the sleeping porch. The wraparound veranda, the covered exterior space that traditional farmhouse design positioned on the north and east elevations to capture morning cool air and afternoon shade simultaneously. These spaces were not luxury additions. They were thermal management zones that allowed occupants to move their sleeping and living activities to the coolest available microclimate within the building envelope as temperatures peaked through summer afternoons. Modern residential design eliminated the porch in the post-war era for a combination of reasons that the construction industry found financially convenient. Covered porch space adds square footage that must be roofed and framed without generating the interior floor area that appraisers measure and buyers pay for. Eliminating the porch reduced construction costs while leaving the home more vulnerable to summer heat, a vulnerability that the simultaneously expanding residential air conditioning market was positioned to address at profitable recurring cost. The wraparound porch that kept farmhouse occupants comfortable on summer evenings was replaced by a concrete slab patio and a window air conditioning unit. The patio generates zero recurring revenue. The air conditioning unit generates equipment sales, installation fees, electricity consumption, refrigerant service calls, and a replacement cycle that the manufacturer designs into the product from its first day of engineering. The fifth decision, and the one that building scientists consistently identify as the single highest impact thermal management choice in traditional farmhouse construction, was the cupola, the roof lantern, the ventilation tower that sits at the peak of a traditional farmhouse roof and does something that no modern residential roofing product attempts to replicate. A farmhouse cupola is a small windowed or louvered structure positioned at the highest point of the roof ridge. Its function is the same thermosiphon principle that Victorian engineers deployed in the Crystal Palace, and that Roman architects built into their villa atriums, creating a deliberate high-level exit point for accumulated hot air that allows cooler replacement air to draw in at low level through the building below. In a well-designed farmhouse with open interior floor plan geometry, a working cupola creates continuous passive airflow through the entire building volume, driven by nothing more than the temperature differential between attic-level heat and ground-level cool air. Independent thermal measurement of farmhouses with functioning cupolas documents interior temperature reductions of 12 to 18 degrees compared to identical structures with sealed roof ridges, 12 to 18 degrees of cooling from a wooden box on top of a roof. That costs nothing to run, nothing to maintain, and nothing to replace on a manufacturer's service schedule. The cupola disappeared from residential construction in the 1950s, not because it stopped working, not because its thermal performance was superseded by something better, because the window air conditioning unit that the post-war housing boom was simultaneously installing in every American bedroom made the cupola seem redundant to homeowners who did not understand that the air conditioning unit was addressing a symptom that the cupola was preventing. I want to be direct with you here because this story deserves honesty alongside its frustration. Traditional farmhouse thermal architecture performs best in climates with meaningful day-to-night temperature differential, the characteristic that allows night ventilation flushing through the cupola and dog trot geometry to remove accumulated daytime heat before the next morning's heat cycle begins. In climates where overnight temperatures remain above 80 degrees across extended periods, passive thermal management alone becomes insufficient regardless of architectural geometry. And farmhouse construction principles are not easily retrofitted into the sealed, low-ceiling, porch-free tract housing that defines the majority of the American residential stock built after 1950. The cupola can be added, the porch can be rebuilt, the ceiling can be raised in a renovation, but the orientation is fixed in the foundation, and the dog-trot geometry requires structural modification that exceeds what most homeowners undertake. These are real limitations, honestly stated. But for the core question, whether the $900 billion residential construction industry has spent 70 years replacing thermally superior passive architecture with thermally inferior sealed envelopes that require mechanical cooling to be habitable in summer, the University of Vermont data, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory Building Science Research, and the documented performance of 31 out of 34 pre-1900 New England farmhouses maintaining interiors 18 degrees cooler than peak outdoor temperature without any mechanical assistance, answers that question with a clarity that the industry's marketing budget cannot obscure. Traditional farmhouse builders oriented their structures to the sun, sized their overhangs to the season, raised their ceilings above the heat layer, cut breezeways through their floor plans, wrapped their porches around their coolest elevations, and put cupolas on their roof ridges to let the heat out. The residential construction industry that replaced them standardized 8-foot ceilings to save lumber, eliminated porches to maximize appraisable square footage, sealed roof ridges against the ventilation that cupolas provided, and sold the AIR conditioning equipment that the ceiling made necessary. The farmhouses are still standing. The ones that have not been renovated into thermal mediocrity are still performing, still maintaining those 18-degree interior to exterior differentials on the hottest summer afternoons, still moving air through their dog-trot corridors without electricity, still letting heat out through their cupolas without a service contract. The geometry that built them has not changed. The sun angle has not changed. The physics of rising hot air has not changed. The profit motive that replaced them with something worse and then sold you equipment to compensate has not changed either. Subscribe to Lost Tech Vault. Share this with someone paying an electricity bill that a farmhouse builder from 1880 would have considered an embarrassing failure of basic architectural common sense. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside it is heavier than this one.